Well, have you ever ordered something and got something you didn't expect? Have you ever done that? Have you ever got something you didn't expect to get? You know, a number of years ago, my family and I, we were living in Calgary, and we were given a gift certificate to a restaurant. And this is a restaurant that I would drive by quite regularly. It was a restaurant that we could not afford to go to. And we were given this gift certificate, which was to this fancy restaurant. And so we were excited. We got a babysitter because there's no way I'm taking the kids there. We got dressed up. We drove to this restaurant. We sat down in it. It was just a wonderful place. It was just beautiful. It had all of this fancy food. We ordered appetizers because it was a big gift certificate. Like, it was one where you can order anything that you want. And so we sat down. We ordered the appetizers. It was awesome. We ordered, I think I ordered steak. Nice, big, thick cut of steak that I would never be able to afford any other time on a pastor's budget. And it was wonderful. And then the guy came around and he said, "Do you have room for dessert?" And my wife said, "No, I'm full." And I said, "Absolutely, because there's still money on this gift certificate." And so I sat there poring over this dessert menu, and I ordered my dessert. And I looked at it and I thought, you know what? I'm in the mood for a really good lemon meringue pie. I love lemon meringue pie, especially fresh one. Not the one you get at Superstore. That's kind of like, it's made in a factory. I wanted one handcrafted, beautiful, just like the steak I just eaten. So I order this lemon meringue pie, and it comes. And I'm like looking at it, and I'm like, that's not lemon meringue pie. That is, it looks something like this. That is not lemon meringue pie. It was this 3 dollops of stuff on a plate with some crumbs spread across the plate. This is not the exact thing. This was the closest I could get to looking what it looked like, because I didn't take a picture back then. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, this is not lemon meringue pie. I know what lemon meringue pie looks like. Like, it's got this lovely crust, and then it's got a good amount of custard, and then this meringue that is just like heavenly, right? That does not look like that. And it wasn't what I expected. And Britt and I are looking at it, and we look at the menu, and there's a word that I forgot, deconstructed. A deconstructed lemon meringue pie. I wanted lemon meringue pie, but I got that. And deconstructed lemon meringue pie, if you haven't had that, is you take your spoon and you construct it on your spoon and then put it in your mouth, and you get the same taste as a lemon meringue pie. So I start eating this thing, constructing it for myself. They should pay me to do that, right? I start constructing this lemon meringue pie, and I put it in my mouth, and oh my goodness, this was the best pie I'd ever had. In fact, I would drive by this restaurant for years after that, and I'm like, I want to go there again. Can somebody please give me a gift certificate so I can go get some more lemon meringue pie, right? It was completely unexpected that this would be the best pie that I ever had, because when I look at it, it's like, that's not what I want. Have you ever had this happen? Have you ever ordered something and got something that you didn't expect? I mean, sometimes this happens. Britt and I will drive her to work, and we'll stop at the Tim Hortons drive-thru, and she'll order her large steep tea, 1 milk, 1 sweetener. That's how good a husband is. I know it. I learned it after many mistakes. And I'll order this large steep tea for her, and they'll give it to me, and we'll drive away, and we'll get halfway to her office and discover it's coffee. And it's like too late to turn around, right? You got what you didn't expect. Or maybe you went to a restaurant like me and you ordered something, you got what you didn't expect. Maybe you were online on Amazon and you found this beautiful dream dress that you always wanted, and you got it, and it's like it's made for a hobbit, right? Or maybe there's something else that you ordered and it wasn't quite what you expected when you got it in the end. It happens, doesn't it? We're in a season of the unexpected. Nobody expected this. Students at U of R and Briarcrest and U of S expected to go back to class tomorrow, not to have everything change. We expect a lot of things, and sometimes we don't get the expected things that we want. And we're in this series called The Greater Than, and it's all about discovering the greater than life. It's built around something that Jesus said, where he said, if you believe in me, you will do all the things that I have done, and you will do even greater things than these. And we've been talking about how do we experience the greater than life that Jesus is inviting us into. And as we do this, you know what we're going to discover? We're going to discover a lot of things we didn't order. Because a lot of times we have this idea of what life with Jesus looks like. And Jesus is completely unexpected. But friends, if we'll embrace him, we'll discover the life that he's created us to have. Kind of like embracing a deconstructed lemon meringue pie and discovering it's the best thing that I've ever had. And you see, here's the truth, is that until you discover, until you embrace all who Jesus is, you will not discover the life that he envisions. Until you embrace all that he is, the problem is that we have trouble embracing who he is. We'll embrace part of who he is, but we ignore the rest of who he is. But until we embrace all of who he is, we will not experience the greater than life. We will miss out on it. And today I want to talk to you about what it is to embrace Jesus. And last week we started by telling the story of some people in John chapter 6. And John chapter 6, as we've gone through the series, we've looked at the miracles of Jesus. And in John chapter 6, there's actually 2 miracles of Jesus. Last week we talked about the feeding of the 5,000. Some of you would know this. If you're online, some of you would know this as well. That Jesus had this huge crowd coming towards him. He was up on a mountain. He'd withdrawn on a mountain, sat down with his disciples, and then saw this huge crowd coming towards him. And he said, well, where should we get food to eat all these people? And the disciples kind of freak out because they don't know where to get food to do this. One is like a worrywart. The other is to take charge. I'll get it done, Jesus. Just trust me, and steals a kid's lunch to make it happen. But Jesus does a miracle and takes 5 loaves and 3 fishes and multiplies them and gives them to everybody, and everybody eats. And I said last week that this was a test of faith. That Jesus, when he said, where are we going to get food to feed all these people? That this was a test of faith to the disciples to see if they would turn to him and say, do you have a plan, Jesus? Do you have a way forward, Jesus? And they failed the test of faith. They failed the test of faith because they did not believe that Jesus had a plan in the midst of this problem. They failed the test of faith because they didn't believe that what they had, the boys' lunch, was enough that Jesus could do anything with. And sometimes we fail the test of faith too, don't we? We don't realize Jesus is a plan, or we don't realize that what Jesus has given us is enough in his hands. And there's another miracle that happens immediately after all of that in John 6. After Jesus feeds everyone, he withdraws. Actually, let's back up and let's start for a second. The people are there. And it says in verse 14 of John chapter 6, it says, after the people saw the sign, meaning after they'd been fed by Jesus, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. There'd been a prophecy many hundreds of years before that a prophet was going to come who was greater than Moses. Why Moses? Because Moses was someone who led the children of Israel out of Egypt, out of slavery. And while they were in the wilderness, Moses prayed and manna came down from heaven, bread came from nowhere. And so Moses is this prophet. And they eat this food and they have this realization, is this the one? Is this the prophet that's greater than Moses, that's in promise long ago? That will feed us, that will lead us, that will take care of us, that will lead us to freedom? This is what they believe. And says Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. And so this crowd, they get fed. They think this is the greater Moses. And they say, let's make this happen. And you see, they remember in their long-term memory the things they learned in school, how the Jews had been slaves in Egypt, oppressed by Pharaoh, and Moses comes along and he leads the people to freedom. He helps them set up the nation of Israel. He gives them an identity as people. He's really doing it all on behalf of God, but Moses has been venerated as this great leader who has done this thing, the rescuer, the lawgiver, the person who represented God to them. And they say, this is the greater Moses. Let's make him our king. And you know what they wanted? They wanted him to free them from the Romans who were ruling over them. They wanted him to reestablish the nation of Israel. They wanted him to look after them. This is the greater Moses. Let's make him king. And Jesus says, you know what? No way. And he withdraws to a mountain. You see, the people that were there that day, they tried to put Jesus in a box. They tried to put Jesus into this really nice defined box. This is what he'll do. This is how he'll do it. This is what's going to happen next. And what does Jesus do in response to trying to be put into a box by the people who he's just fed? in a completely unexpected way. When they try to put Jesus in the box, he withdraws. He steps back. He goes, if you want to put me in a box, then I'm just going to step back. I'm going to step away. I'm going to withdraw to a mountain. And here's the thing, friends. Whenever you try to put Jesus in a box, he withdraws. If you try to put Jesus and define what he's going to do or command that he's going to do this or he's going to do that, he's going to step back and he's going to withdraw. Because you can't put Jesus in the box. He's unexpected. He does things that are unexpected. He came to be the Messiah. This is why he came to earth. The Messiah is an appointed king, God's anointed one, literally what it means. And he comes from the line of David, the great monarch. And he's come to establish his kingdom. These are all the prophecies from the Old Testament that Jesus fulfills. And so it's natural for them to expect that Jesus is going to be their king based on their understanding. And they try to put Jesus in this box and he just withdraws. He steps away. Do you ever put Jesus in a box? You know, I grew up going to church. I was talking with somebody on Friday. I said, I think I was in church 3 days after I was born. And, I was in an Alliance church. This is my family of churches. I've been this my whole life. I've grown up going to church every week. I've learned all these stories. I've sung the songs that are associated with the stories. You name it, I've done all this stuff, right? And you know what it did for me as I grew up in church, and maybe this is the same for you if you've grown up in a church like me, is that it caused me to put Jesus in a box. To say these are the parameters of what Jesus does. This is what the Jesus life looks like. This is what it means to follow Jesus and to define this lovely little box. And if you are outside the box, sorry, you're outside the box. And I put Jesus in a box for most of my life. In my childhood, in my teens, put Jesus in a box. In my young adult years, put Jesus in a box. And you know what happens? Is that Jesus withdraws. And you know what? This greater than life, this is something that I've only been discovering over the last decade of my life because I've said, I'm not going to put you in a box, Jesus. I'm not going to define who you are. I'm going to let you decide and tell me who you are. I'm going to let you lead instead of me telling you how to lead and how to do things. And the people that are here after the first miracle, they want Jesus to do the things that they want him to do. And friends, if you want the greater than life, it means letting Jesus out of the box that you've tried to stuff him into and following him even to places that are uncomfortable, even to places that are risky, even to places that you never expected to go. And you just might find that the life that you're looking for is found when you let Jesus out of the box. Tell me, have you put Jesus in a box today? That he doesn't do that, and he doesn't do that, and this is the way he is, and that. Let him out of the box. Because I'll tell you what, here's what I know. He ain't there. He's not in their box, because he's already withdrawn. But if you'll embrace him, man, you'll discover something greater than the box you created. Jesus withdraws to a mountain. You see, well, that's the second blank. We're going without the blanks. Jesus is the greater Moses. It's true, okay? All that they thought this is the greater Moses, and they wanted to make him king. And the truth is, he is the greater Moses. He is the prophecy that's been promised long ago. He is everything that is that, and so much more. But you can't contain him. It goes on and says, when evening came, his disciples went down to the lake where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. John, when he writes this, it's interesting because he makes it sound like the disciples left without him, doesn't it? When you read that, do you get the impression that the disciples were impatient and left without him? I don't know if that's the case or not. John makes us think that way. That Jesus went up on a mountain, and here's what you need to know. When you read the Bible and you see someone going up on a mountain, pay attention to that, okay? Because in the ancient Near East, or in the time of Jesus and in the time of Moses and all that, the idea of going up a mountain was about communing with God, connecting with God. You see, it was believed that the divine and the mundane, that's you and me, we're mundane. I know you don't want to admit it, but it is. We're not divine, sorry. But the divine and the mundane, they meet on top of a mountain. That's why in Greek mythology there's Mount Olympus, right? And you always hear in mythology, let's go up to Mount Olympus, or let's try to go there. This is why in Judaism you have the temple mount, right? This is the connection point between God and man. And so Jesus goes up on a mountain. Why? Because he's connecting with his Father after a busy day of feeding people. And the disciples, John makes it seem that they're just impatient and they just want to run ahead. And I don't know if that's the case or not, but I know in my life, sometimes I do this, right? It's like a busy day of serving, and someone says, we should pray, we should do this, we should do this, we should connect with God. And I just want to go to bed. You know, I just want to go home. I don't want to linger. I just want to go. Do you ever do that? Do you ever sometimes leave Jesus up on the mountain and you go on because you got things you got to do? It was getting to be night. And being on the Sea of Galilee, because they're fishermen and we're told that they came by boat to where they were. Being fishermen, they knew you shouldn't be on the Sea of Galilee at night because a storm can come up very quickly. And lo and behold, that's what happens. A strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. And when they had rowed 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. A strong wind was blowing. So the boat that they are in, it has oars and it has a sail. And so we know because they're rowing that the wind was going against them. Have you ever tried to paddle when the wind is going against you in a boat? I remember when I was like 10, I was at camp and we were going camping and we got into a canoe and we set out onto the lake and we were just going, maybe a mile down the beach. We thought we were going to the ends of the world to go camping, right? Turned out because we tried going and the wind was blowing against us and the canoes just kept going back, blown back the other direction. And so the mile now became a mile and a half because we ended up a mile and a half back the other way. And our counselor, Gil, he got so frustrated with us, he said, okay, just put the canoes on the shore and start walking. This is why I know it's only a mile and a half that we were going along the shore, right? Because he had us walk instead of canoe. And the disciples are trying to do the same thing. They're rowing as hard as they can, but the wind keeps blowing them, or at best, they're just stopped dead in their tracks. And they've gone 2 to 3 miles. They're not far away from where they started. These are professional fishermen who know how to work a boat, not 10-year-olds trying to canoe for the first time. And they're going nowhere. Do you ever feel like that in life? Do you ever feel like you're rowing and you're getting nowhere in life? That's what I imagine this is like. That sometimes we think we're doing everything right, and why aren't things working out for us? And the disciples are doing everything right and they can't get home. And then they look and they see Jesus walking on the water, only they don't recognize him. Remember I said last week, I said, you know what, up until this point, Jesus hasn't had a track record, but at this point now in John 6, everything shifts and everything changes because now Jesus has a track record. They've seen him for who he really is. And they see someone walking on the water towards them. And it doesn't say it here, but if you look in the other Gospels, you see that actually they thought it was a ghost. They didn't even consider that this could be Jesus. They saw someone walking, a person, and they thought it was a ghost. They had been with Jesus for years at this point. They had seen him feed 5,000 people. They had seen him do amazing things, yet they didn't recognize him. They were frightened. And sometimes when we feel like we're getting nowhere fast in life, we can feel frightened. And we don't recognize Jesus. We don't recognize Jesus in the moment. We don't expect to see him. But he said to them, Jesus said to them, "It is I, don't be afraid." And scholars are they debate on whether this is the statement that Jesus is declaring he is God or not. It's the phraseology. God often in the Old Testament, when he appears to Moses, he says, "I am who I am." And some have said that this is Jesus' way of saying it in Greek in the New Testament, because it would have been a different language in the Old Testament. We don't know for sure. Have to ask him someday. But it's Jesus saying, "It is I. Don't be afraid." You know how many times, Jesus just countless over and over and over again in the New Testament, he says these words, "Do not fear, do not be afraid, do not be afraid, don't fear." He says it over and over again. Do you ever listen to him when he says that? Or do you just like blow past it when he says, "Don't be afraid"? He says it's I. And then they were willing to take him into the boat. You know, when we recognize our need for Jesus, we're willing to let him into the boat, right? But too often we don't let him into the boat because we don't recognize our need for him. Or we don't recognize him at all. We think he's a ghost. We think he's something else, and we keep him outside the boat. But when we come to embrace who he is and we recognize him for who he is, boy, we're willing to let him into the boat, just like the disciples did. And it says immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. Some scholars have said this is another miracle in John, that they reached the shore. They got where they wanted to go as soon as Jesus got in the boat. And I wonder today if you're rowing and you're fighting against a storm and you just don't know how you're going to go forward, and Jesus is there, and you just need to let him into the boat and he'll take care of it. He'll get you there to where you need to be. Maybe not where you expected to be, but where you need to be. What an amazing thing that happens in this. And you know, we talked about how Jesus is the greater Moses, how he is an unexpected one. You see, the disciples, the crowd wanted to put Jesus in a box, but the disciples, they didn't recognize who Jesus really is. That's why they didn't let him in. We don't know who he is, and sometimes we do this. We don't let Jesus into the boat because we don't really know what he wants. We don't really know what he wants for our lives. We resist what he wants to do in our life. We stop short of doing things that he actually commands us to do because, well, we come up with all sorts of reasons. You know, there are times when Jesus very clearly says things in the Word. Things like, be baptized. Things like, fear not. Things like, love your neighbor. And we make up reasons to not actually take him at his word, and we don't recognize the command that he's issuing, and we keep him out of the boat, and then we wonder why we struggle so much. When if we would actually just recognize him and the authority that he has in our life, and let him into the boat, that it would change what's going on in our life. But you see, the problem is we don't embrace who he fully is. We don't fully embrace him. We embrace him enough to fit in our box. We embrace him enough that maybe he'll help us when we're in danger or in trouble, but we don't embrace who he really is. And John uses this chapter, and it's become one of my favorite chapters in the book of John, to kind of talk about who Jesus really is. And in your groups this week, there's discussion guide questions on the website. So you can form your own group in your house and you can talk about it by yourself. But in your groups this week, go through this book and just discover who Jesus is. And one of the things that we say is that Jesus is the greater Moses. I've already said that to you this morning, that yes, he is the greater Moses, just like all those people wanted. But he's the greater Moses in a way that they don't expect. He's a greater Moses than in a way that the disciples don't expect. Well, what does it mean to be the greater than Moses? Well, to understand that, we have to look at what Moses did for the people. Moses was the rescuer. Moses was the rescuer of the Israelites. He frees them from slavery. He leads them away from Pharaoh, who's oppressing them, who's causing them to die, killing their kids, or their slave masters. He rescues them from that. And Jesus is the rescuer, but not as the crowd expected. The crowd expected him to rescue them from the Romans, but Jesus, my friends, rescues you from something far greater, yourself. You see, from the moment you were born broken. No matter what you think about yourself today, if you have not come to the point where you believe in Jesus and call him your leader, your Savior, you are broken. You are broken because you know, maybe this will resonate with you. You've done things that you didn't want to do, and you don't know why you did them. That's because there's something inside of us that causes us to do that. You're broken because you've broken relationships with spouses, with friends, with kids, with coworkers. You're broken because you've broken relationship with God by not living the way he created you to live. And the word that we throw around when we talk about this brokenness is sin. And God says that all have sinned and fallen short of his holy way of living. We're all broken. But Jesus came to rescue you, to transform you, to take your brokenness and make you whole, to rescue you from your sin, but also to rescue you. See, we often think, yeah, he's my rescuer, and I came to faith. I came to faith when I was 9 years old, but I found myself when I was 20 years old needing rescue. Because I'd put Jesus in a box, and I wasn't living fully for him. He was over here, and my life was over here. And I found myself as a young father and a young husband in the first 5 years of our marriage when both of us will tell you that we weren't sure we were going to make it. And I needed rescue from myself. I needed to embrace Jesus for who he really is, because Jesus is our rescuer. He's your rescuer today. In whatever situation you're in, if you don't know him from your brokenness, he is your rescuer. Have you accepted him? If we repent and believe. Repent means to acknowledge that we have fallen short in relationships, in situations, in all of life. And believe means to put our trust in his leadership and begin to follow him first. And there are times in your life, I think when I look back on my life, I can see in every decade of my life, I have come to this point where I have needed rescuing and needed to surrender again to Jesus. And I would say that in my life, I have probably had 5 decades worth of conversions in my life. I'm almost 50. Because I keep coming to this point where I have to choose, am I going to surrender to his way or to my way? Am I going to let him rescue me, or am I going to be my own rescuer? And if I want to be my own rescuer, it's like rowing in a boat against a storm. And maybe today you need to let Jesus be your rescuer. Moses also establishes a way of living. He is the one that God uses to give them the law. He gets to Sinai and he goes up a mountain. He leads the children of Israel out of Egypt to Sinai, and he goes up on a mountain and he meets with God. And God gives him commandments, 10 commandments we call them, and he puts them on stone tablets, and he brings them down. And from those 10 commandments, Moses establishes a series of laws that create an identity. It creates a people, a way of living that is different for the Israelites than it is in any other nation that is around at that time. And it's a way of living that still today, many of the laws that were created at that time still exist within our law system today. That's how powerful the way that Moses was given by God to give to the people. But Moses is credited as the lawgiver. It was God doing it, but Moses gets credit as the lawgiver. But then Jesus comes. And Jesus gives us a new way of living. He says, I've come to establish a new kingdom. The kingdom of heaven is here. Repent and believe, a new way of living. He teaches us a way of living that's grounded first in love. That is love for God and love for others. Jesus gives us a new way of living. He takes the law, we're told, and he writes it on our heart, not on stone tablets or a list of rules that we can post on a wall, but he says, I'm going to teach you my way, and I'm going to put it in your heart, so that if you ever doubt what my way is, just listen to your heart. And he gives us his Spirit to help us understand what's written on our heart. You see, when he rescues us, this is what happens, is he writes his way of living on our heart. And he puts his Spirit inside of us so that we know how to live this new way. Jesus is the new way giver, the greater Moses who gives us a new way, a better way. Do you have this new way? I was a 20-year-old father needing rescue, and I turned to Jesus and I said, I can't do this. I can't be the man that Britain needs. I can't be the man that my kids need. And I remember one night after arguing it again, laying in bed and crying and just saying, I can't do this anymore, Jesus. I can't do this. I can't do this. And I'll follow your way. And 29 years later, we're still a family. Not because of me, friends, not because of me, but because of Jesus and his way of living. Because I needed rescuing and I needed a new way, and he gave it to me. And this is who Jesus is, the greater Moses, if you'll follow him. And Moses is also known to be the person who represented God to the children of Israel. So he goes up on the mountain And he gets these stone tablets and he comes down and everybody starts freaking out. Do you know why? Because his face is glowing and not because he's got good makeup. His face is glowing and people are freaking out, and so he starts to wear a veil so that people won't be scared by his glow-in-the-dark face. Wouldn't that be cool, have a glow-in-the-dark face? Maybe not. Britain already doesn't like my snoring. She probably wouldn't like my glow-in-the-dark face. He puts a veil over his face so that people won't get freaked out. But here's the thing you need to know, is that over time, you know what? That glory of God that was displayed on his face, because he'd been in the presence of God, and the glory had stuck to him. He wasn't holy. But the glory of God is so powerful that it stuck to him and was evident on his face. And he reflected God's glory. So he puts this veil on, but over time, the glory of the Lord faded. Just like a pair of blue jeans fade if you wear them every single day, right? And they wear out. And Moses had to keep going back up on the mountain to get more of the glory of God in him. But here's the thing. Jesus, who is up on a mountain, is God himself. He says to the disciples later, "It is I, don't be afraid. I am God." And Jesus, who is God himself, is up on a mountain, and the disciples are in trouble. And God himself comes down the mountain and walks on water and enters into their situation and helps them. You see, where Moses represented God, Jesus is God. And Jesus is the presence of God in you, in your life. He is the greater Moses. But the thing is that the crowd and the disciples didn't recognize it. They didn't recognize their need for rescue in the way that Jesus came to rescue. They didn't recognize the Jesus way of living. They didn't recognize that they had God himself in their very presence. Every single one of the people there, you know why they came to see Jesus? Because they wanted to experience God, and they didn't understand that Jesus is God himself, and they go away. And sometimes we fail to embrace Jesus for who he really is, in all of his glory, in all of his splendor, because we're trying to put him in a box, or because we're scared of what he might do if we let him in the boat, and we just lose out. And until you embrace this Jesus who walks on water, who feeds multitudes, who gets you places like that, I can't wait for that, right? No more commute time. Till we embrace that Jesus, the Jesus who is the rescuer, the Jesus who has a new way of living for your life, until we embrace that, until we embrace Jesus as fully God, we will never experience the life we were created to have. C.S. Lewis, in his books, The Chronicles of Narnia, he gives a metaphor for Christ. It's Aslan the lion. You've probably seen the movie The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or something like that. And it's this big, ferocious lion, supersized lion, really. And you know why C.S. Lewis makes the Christ figure a lion in those series? Because lions are scary. Lions are wild. Lions are unpredictable. I've been to Africa. I've driven in places where there's lions, and they say, don't put your hand out the window. Don't get out of the car. Don't. Right? Why? Because a lion might bite you and rip your arm off or do something unpredictable, right? Because Aslan, and they say this in the book series, they say that Aslan is a wild lion. He's unpredictable. And you know what? Christ is a wild lion. He's unpredictable. But C.S. Lewis also paints this beautiful picture where Lucy, this young girl, comes up to Aslan and buries her face in his mane and hugs him. And this is Jesus, a wild and unpredictable lion who roars, who's scary at times. But if you'll embrace, you can sink your face into the mane of this lion. The chapter ends with an interesting dialogue that goes on. You read some of it this week in your groups. But what happens is this crowd that we started with, they realize Jesus has left, but no other boats have gone, only the disciples' boat went. And so they go looking for him, and they find him in a synagogue in Capernaum, and they have a discussion with him. And he says some things that are really difficult to hear, that don't fit within the box that they have for Jesus. And so they turn and walk away. And even some of his disciples, we don't know if they were in the boat or not, but John writes, and he just calls them disciples. They're not the 12, but he calls them disciples. They were people who are following Jesus. And they hear what Jesus says. And they don't like what Jesus says. It's uncomfortable. It will make them do things they don't want to do. And so they turn and they leave as well. And Jesus turns to the 12 and he says this, "You do not want to leave too, do you?" He turns to the 12 that are left. Everybody else has left him. I said last week that this is the high point of Jesus' time on earth in terms of popularity. That thousands of people are following him, but at the end of it, there's only 12 and him. And he says to them, "You don't want to leave too, do you?" And Simon Peter, one of the 12, says to him, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of life. You have the words of life. Where else are we going to find them?" And they fully embrace who Jesus is. Sure, they stumble and they fall as they go forward. They find themselves in incredible crises. And the only thing that helps them through is embracing Jesus for who he really is. Tell me, what do you need to do today? How do you need to embrace Jesus today? What is it that you need to do? Do you need to embrace him as a rescuer? Maybe for the first time, to actually say, "You know what, Jesus, you are my Savior. I need to repent. I need to believe. I want a new life. I want a new way." Or maybe you've been going through life for some time, and maybe this is the point in your life where you need to decide again to surrender to him and let him rescue you. Maybe there's a new way that Jesus wants you to go, something he wants you to do, and you've been resisting it. You've been fighting it, and maybe it's time to surrender to it. Or maybe you just need to begin to recognize that Jesus is God, and he's given you his Spirit. And what that means is that everywhere you go, you take the presence of God with you. That when you're fighting with your spouse, you have the presence of God in you at that moment. What does that mean, and how does that make you feel? When you're getting angry at your kids, that the presence of God is within you, and he's watching and listening everything. When you're watching that show, or going to that place, or when you see that person on the street who needs some help, that you have the presence of God within you. And maybe you need to begin to let that presence of God define you and define what you do. Let him out of the box. Stop being afraid of who he is and embrace who he fully is. And when we do, we will all discover the greater than life that is waiting for us. I want to invite the worship team to come back up and lead us in our closing song.